Hi, it's Sharon from SharonTheReader.com. It's been a while since I posted anything, but I actually have to post 3 things this week. So this is one that has been around me for possibly 3 weeks, I would say. And it came in bits and pieces. It's actually a conversation or conversations with Natalie Wood. I expected that most of this was going to be on her death, but it actually wasn't. It was on a lot of things, including her death. I'll tell you how she looked when I saw her. She was wearing a cream cowl-neck sweater, beige trousers, and tan flat shoes. Impeccably dressed. Her makeup was impeccable and her hair was very shiny, really sat really well. She was definitely a beautiful looking woman. Now, what I know of Natalie Wood is I saw her in Gypsy Rosalie, and I thought she was absolutely amazing. And the other thing that I saw her in was, and a lot of people, if I mention this, really don't remember it, it was called This Property is Condemned. So they're the 2 things that I had actually witnessed her in. I hadn't seen her in anything else. Or if I had, I hadn't taken any notice of her. I will say that she was direct with a lovely charm, and it was not a forced charm or a fitted on charm. She genuinely was a lovely lady. But there was things that she wanted talked about and she wanted acknowledged. And she said she just needed the voice to do it. I'm going to tell you 2 things that continually was said by her. These never changed. And until the end, until one person at the end. One of the things that she said all through it was, I had to be a good girl. So that was something that was ingrained in her. She had to constantly be, in any circumstances that would be public, a good girl. And the other thing, every time she talked about someone, was they did what they had to do. For each person that she's going to talk about, bar a few people who she worked with and were friends of hers, the one thing at the end is always they did what they had to do. So she started off talking about her childhood, and she said that her mother had an incredible fear of poverty. And this was something that it didn't matter what happened. This fear was constantly inside her mum. The mother seemed to realise, when Natalie would have been quite a young kid, that she was a very pretty child. And she did kind of flick me in and out of different situations. And she was what I would call a pretty beautiful kid. There was no doubt about it. She had that sparkle, she had that glow. And obviously her mother could see this. Her mother decided that it was a good way of getting money into the family if Natalie could start to work in the film industry. So there was she didn't mind. She was quite okay with that. I think she felt a little bit robbed of her childhood, but not in any major way. You know, she didn't dwell too much on that. She did what she had to do, and as always, she was, because it had been drummed into her, a good child. So she always knew her lines. She was always perfectly mannered on set, and never give anyone any bother or any trouble. So that was the beginning of what we would know of Natalie Wood starting out as a child star. There are facts, and I think everybody knows them, and that there's no point in me telling you what she told me when you already know it, and I know it, and she didn't tell it to me. And that is that she had a real phobia about water, which came from her mother and a fortune teller. And so for people who don't believe in fortune tellers, anyone else would kind of brush it off. For people who do, they'll probably take it to heart. Her mother took it to heart, and she passed it on to her daughter, that there would be an accident or something bad would happen around water. So she grew up with this intense fear of water. Now she then said something, and it was pretty interesting, because these are not things that you would think or I would think. And it wasn't even something that she was aware of until after her own death. People seem to be in different places after their death. So I'm just giving you what her reaction to things were after her death. She realized that she did go for an audition, and it was with an older director. The man, to me, probably looked late 40s, 50s, early 50s. And so she was brought to the audition, and she was left there with this older man. And I would say, looking at her, and I'm not great judging ages, she probably would have been between 12 and 14. And she was molested by him. And the one thing that happened when she came home was that when she told her mother said, "We don't talk about things like that in this house." What she was really getting told was, whatever happens, this is not being talked about. We're not going to acknowledge this. You've got the part. You know what to do. My job is done. And that was a pretty horrific thing, if you're listening to it, that a young girl could be sent to an older man and this can happen. And she comes back to her mother, who she loves, and she did love her mother. There's no doubt about that. But whilst she may have loved her mother, she said her way of coping with what happened was her mother did what she had to do. So her mother actually was aware when she went to see this older man that her daughter was going to be raped. And it was going to be okay as far as her mother was concerned, because it would get the part that the mother wanted her to get. In her own way, she didn't really put responsibility onto her mother, and that's where this constant thing that kept coming up, and it was a saying, and it was almost parroted throughout the days that she was talking to me, was her mother did what she had to do. That was the rape. And I would say she was probably between 12 and 14 years of age. She then told me to watch a film that an aunt of mine actually said was her favourite film, and I had never seen it, and it was called Splendour in the Grass. So we did get a copy of Splendour in the Grass. I watched it, and the next morning she said the scene where she was in the bath and then got out of the bath, because her mother in the film had said to her, "Are you still a virgin?" And she said on that take, it was only a one take. It was like a volcano to her. The eruption of how she really felt about her mother was all in that scene. And she had no idea how she was going to play that. She just presumed she would come off with the lines, she would deliver what was necessary, but she said it was something snapped in her, and that's basically where it was. This is how I feel about you. I may love you, but this is how I feel about you. And it was pretty angry for anyone who's seen it. It was hysterical, it was very distraught. It was a person virtually out of their mind. She said that was one scene that kind of surprised everyone because it was just taken in a one scene cut. There was no second cut. There was no second cut needed. And after watching it, and if anyone hasn't watched it or has watched it, think back to that scene, because that was actually very real in her world and in her life. That was the one time she let fly, and no one had any idea why. It was just she acted that part so well. That was not an act. That was Natalie. So on that one, although all the way through this dialogue she had with me over days, the one thing, as I say, we heard it so many times, you're going to get sick listening to this line. They did what they had to do. This was the part where she felt that she had been betrayed. And betrayal is basically what this is really about. It is about the betrayal of the people around her who should not have been betraying her, who should have been taking care of her, nurturing her, being what they should have been for her. Betrayal, you're going to find, comes out in every direction in this. She said being a good girl, as far as she was concerned, was an outward thing. It was how the public perceived you. She said she was no angel, but she was talking probably a little bit older than this when she referred to I was no angel, and she meant she had slept with other people and things like that. Nothing unusual. I don't think she'd done anything really wrong. That wasn't the impression I got, but it did not go with the good girl image, and so therefore to her that was the private side. The public side was always the good girl, the person who would make people comfortable, make people feel at ease, be charming, never, interrupt anyone, never put anyone in an awkward position. She then said that while she was doing Splendour in the Grass, there's also a scene, and it's a waterfall scene, and it's where I think was that she was going to kill herself at this waterfall. Now, I will say, as the credits rolled, it said directed by Elia Kazan. And she said she loved working with him, absolutely loved working with him. He could bring out the very best in any actor. But where the waterfall scene took place, she was told she didn't have to do that because everyone knew she had a terror of water. So the last thing this girl wants to be is anywhere close to a waterfall. And it was a rushing waterfall. It was a violent waterfall. But she was told that she didn't need to worry about this. This was taken care of. They had a stunt double for it. And she said they didn't have a stunt double for it. There was no stunt double at all. And Kazan led her to believe all the way through she wasn't going to do this part. Someone else would come in and do it for her. But when no one else was there, because there never was a stunt double set up, she was left in the position of actually having to do that herself. And she said she felt that that was one of the major betrayals in her life as well, to put her in a position where she was literally petrified. Now, she said it turned out wonderful in the movie for anyone watching. For him as a director, it was superb, as was the bath scene. But for her, it was a betrayal. He had betrayed her trust. He had put her in a position she never would have allowed herself to be put into. And then she said, he did what he had to do, which is incredible. So while she felt betrayed by him and betrayed by her mother, it was something that she did not hold a grudge over after death. I don't even think she held a grudge when she was alive. To me, it was kind of strange, because I would hold a grudge, and I think a lot of people would hold a grudge if they were in that position, but she didn't. She then said that she had married Robert Wagner, and again, she was prepared to be the good wife. What she was unaware of, and this is the first time she was married to him, was that he was actually bisexual. And she walked in and she found him entangled with another man sexually. She said that really sent her over the edge. That was a very dangerous thing for her to find out. She thought that she had the perfect marriage, she was the perfect wife, he was the perfect husband, although he had a bit of a temper, but she said she also had a little bit of a temper as well, privately. So to find that out really broke her. It really put her in pieces. She then talked about people she'd worked with. And she talked about James Dean, and she said that she loved his freedom. She absolutely loved his freedom. She learned so much from him. The way he could condense himself, the things he could let out in a scene, the things he could hold back, and at all times he could always come back to himself, because he knew who the self was. He had a core, and he knew where that core was, and it was never far away. So he could give the most dramatic scenes and give great performances, which she watched. And she said also then he could come back and just be Jimmy. And she said she really learned a lot from him and would have loved to have had the freedom that he had. But for that type of freedom that James Dean had, she would have to stop being the good girl. And that wasn't something that she could afford to be, or even knew how to be, if that makes any sense to anyone. That she didn't even know where the core of herself was. I find that a strange thing. I find it strange that she didn't know who she really was as a person. She then talked about Warren Beatty, and she said that he did play on his good looks and also his talent. She really loved the fact that he just didn't give a damn. He delivered, and at the end of the day, that was it. He gave good performances, but he could get away with things that she could never get away with. And that was something she really liked. Now, she said when she divorced Robert Wagner, she took the heat for that. It never came out that he was bisexual. She never gave any version to anyone except her mother and a friend what she actually found that evening in her home. So in actual fact, she took the fall for that, and it was publicly talked about, and probably in magazines, whatever. It was believed that her and Warren Beatty were actually having an affair on set, and that's what ended the marriage, which was not the truth. She said they didn't even get on that well to begin with. Although, as time went on, they did get on fairly well and they were good friends. They even did it for a short period of time, but she knew it was only dating. It was nothing serious. She took her fun, if you want, but that was offset. It was private, and it had nothing to do with the breakdown of her marriage. Her marriage had broken down long before she ever involved herself with Warren Beatty. Surprisingly enough, she was also exceptionally close to Frank Sinatra. Now that did take me by surprise, because I always imagined Frank Sinatra being, the crooner, the singer, and I'm not putting the man down, but it just would never strike me that their paths would actually cross. I would have thought he was way too old for her. And apparently, there was a sexual relationship that took place between him and her and was ongoing for quite some time. But it was never like, I'm dating you, or we're seen together on a regular basis. It was very private. And she said that he was very, very sweet to her, which sounds strange because she actually, again, was underage. So she would have been just probably hitting, say, 16-ish. I think that would be underage in America, I think. Plus the age gap would have been pretty big. But she did say that he was a very good friend of hers and that she could rely on him. She could rely on him for advice, she could rely on him for support for certain things, and she was genuinely very fond of him, and him of her. So here's three people who, she didn't put that quote in. They did what they had to do. That was left out. Those three people she had full respect for, and she had a lot of affection for, and she learned a lot from them. Even though she couldn't put it into her own life, she actually learned a lot from them, and she said that. She then married again, and she said it wasn't working for her. It just did not genuinely work. The person was older than she was, and she said it just didn't have that zing that she had with Robert Wagner. So that was, you kind of think, well, why didn't you just play around? Why didn't you have fun? Why didn't you date lots of people? But she seemed to be looking for this security, this person who was going to look after her welfare, be there for her. And I think this man actually did his best to be there for her, but there was no spark. And she was young. She was looking for a spark. She got around town. She was seen with the right people. She went to the right places. She said she really, she put herself out there. She enjoyed herself. She had fun. But she's all through it, there was still this thing with Robert Wagner. And it just was something that, if you seen him, everything would come back again. This wonderful marriage, what they could have had, all the rest of it. And then he pursued her. So she went along with the pursuing, and she said she actually, in her own way, would make it known where she was going to be, who she was going to be with, so that the paparazzi, as we would call them today, could actually find out where she was, take photographs, and she knew it would get back to Wagner, who had suddenly started to send her flowers. He had taken a very keen interest again, and she was interested in the interest. She felt that possibly he had changed, that this may have been something he was going through. He said there was something he was going through. It was not something he was. The flame was ignited again, and it had never really gone out. which is, you find your husband in bed with another man, I think the flame would go out pretty fast. But having said that, not everyone is the same. They then started dating again. They remarried for a second time. And she said, I learned to cook. I learned to be a hostess. I learned to be a good wife, an understanding wife. I learned when to back off when I knew his temper was a little bit hot, right? That it wasn't being provoked. And she said it seemed that they had a very good marriage. She said no one could have asked for more. I mean, if there was something like a piece of jewellery or whatever that she liked, it was in her hand. He'd bought it for her. So things were really going well. And there didn't seem to be any other men on the scene. So she had to take him at his word on that. And she did believe that there were no other men. And it seems that there weren't. Or if there were, she was completely unaware of it. Even in death, she was unaware of it. Whereas with her mother, in death, she realised that her mother had actually pimped her out to the older man for the part. She didn't know that when she was alive, but she did find that out in death. So the marriage seemed to be going very well. Roles were coming in for her. And I think, like anyone in show business, you go through ups and downs. You know, you can have a really good 2-year run and then you could sit and do nothing for another 2 years. But her roles were coming in and they were coming in well, and his were less than. And she said there was a jealousy. There was a jealousy of who was making the big bucks, who was making the real money. And she did her very best to kind of keep that as far away from him as possible. So whilst he was working, she would ask how his day went, was he tired, fix him a drink, things like that. Even though she may have been filming and on location herself, she always made time to phone home and to make sure that everything was okay, he was okay. So she really did play the dutiful wife. And she said she was so busy acting the dutiful wife, acting the good girl, acting the good wife, the good mother, the good everything, the good friend, the good daughter. And yet she never knew who she herself really was. She then started to talk about the marriage starting to go downhill. And it went downhill due to jealousy. It also went downhill due to the fact that she was starting to get tired. She was starting to get exhausted being this person. She may not have known who she was, but she did know one thing, that the price of what she was turning herself into and what she had turned herself into was really exhausting for her. So she started then, if they had a row, she didn't back down and she didn't back away. She held her own. She then said that Christopher Walken, who was with them on the night that she died, was making a movie with her, and he was the up-and-coming star. He was the bright new light, and he had just came from, I believe it was a Deer Hunter, which he had done very well in. I think she was kind of flattered that she was asked to act with him. And she said that they went off on the boat, all three of them, for a good weekend. It was just a weekend of complete and utter relaxation. Eat what you want, drink what you want, enjoy yourself, have fun. Because Robert was very proud of the boat that he owned, and he liked people to come spend time with them on it. enjoy themselves, and she was the perfect hostess. And this was one time she really didn't mind being the perfect hostess, because she said Walken kind of was flirtatious with her, but not flirting, just flirtatious, made her feel good. Nothing bad was happening, nothing bad was going on, except Robert had now developed a problem with alcohol. And she said that probably was there growing for quite a while, but it had now got to the point where anything could start it off. Once drunk, he was not what you call a happy drunk. He was an aggressive, confrontational drunk. She said she mellowed out in drink. Christopher Walken, she said, drank. It didn't make any difference to his personality at all. He didn't get mellow and he didn't get aggressive. He just remained the person he was. So, they're all on the boat. They are coming and going back and forward to shore, and they're having what's considered to be a good time. Except Robert was not having a good time. And that caused a lot of friction later on. It caused arguments and it caused violence. And this is where she starts to talk about the water. And she said, really, I don't need to say it. People have their own views on what happened that night. But she said what she will say is that she was physically abused. She was badly bruised. She had a slap across her face with a mark from Robert Wagner's wedding ring. That after that, she said, I'm just going to say there was dark water. Then that's what she was terrified of. Plus, she didn't swim. She leaves you to make up your own mind what happened. And I will say, she did actually show me things. And for me personally, who am not a good swimmer, I can swim, but I'm not a strong swimmer, right? The water that is starting to fill your lungs was pretty terrifying, because you're not coming up and, you're not spitting it out, you're not coughing it out. You're just going further and further down until the blackness of the water and the end of your life becomes one. Now, this is where she really starts to call out Betrayals again. She said, Robert Wagner knew exactly what happened, but he did what he had to do. And he did what he had to do because it would have destroyed his reputation. It would have destroyed everything about him. And a lot of truths would have come out that he could not afford to have them come out. He was already working on a TV series which was quite successful, and as far as she was concerned, she understood he did what he had to do. So that's a big one. That's a big statement to make when you think of what I've just said beforehand. She then said when it came to Christopher Walken, he could not have missed the noise because he was there during the argument. He watched the argument take place. He watched things being smashed. He watched all of those things. And for her to be standing on the deck and shouting, and Wagner on the deck shouting, and things being broken, and noises that anyone else would get up and see what the heck was going on, he said nothing. And she said she could understand that because he was just starting to peak in his career, and it was in front of him. It was all in front of him. He was the new star. And she said he was a wonderful actor. So she says he did what he needed to do, which was to secure himself and say that he was in his cabin, didn't see or was aware of anything. And she could actually understand that. The one person that she could not say the same thing, they did what they had to do, was what they called, although she said RJ did not like him, was they kept referring to him as the captain. And that was the other person who was on the boat that night. Now, she said there was many things that he could have done. He could have put the searchlights out for her. They may not have picked it up, but they could have at least tried. They could have contacted the Coast Guard, and that wasn't done. And hours passed. Instead, Robert Wagner and the captain had a few drinks instead, while the water's filling her lungs. Now that was a betrayal that she said she cannot forgive and has never forgiven. And that's one, and it was the only one that she said they did what they had to do. He did what he had to do, did not apply when it came to the captain. She said he waited, and he waited, and he waited. And then, when it suited him, he released a book, apparently, and he started doing interviews and telling the truth. And he said it was out of guilt. And she said it had nothing to do with guilt. It had all to do with money. So, for all that was going on, that was the only person that she felt had really betrayed her. The rest of the betrayals she could overlook because there was a reason for them. With her mother, it was money, and it was getting out of poverty. She was the meal ticket for getting out of poverty. She could understand that. The mother was doing what she had to do. Even to the point of pimping her own daughter, she did what she had to do for her to get the part. Wagner did what he had to do because he didn't want his reputation to be in any way sullied by the press in Hollywood, where he'd probably never work again. Walken, she had no regrets there, even though she knew he could have came to her aid. She said he did what he had to do because he had a career path in front of him, and this was not going to sit very well on his career path, where he was just starting out, as she had done herself. So the one person that she held accountable and still has not forgiven was actually the captain, who apparently she felt was a very good friend of hers. She felt quite protected and very close to him. And that was the one letdown that she couldn't get over. I will say one thing. She was a lovely lady, and I mean that genuinely. She really was. We think of stars as, you know, they're above us, they're not like us, all those things. This girl paid the price over and over and over again to be who she was, and unfortunately never got to know who she was. And it was quite interesting how, when she talked about James Dean and when she talked about Warren Beatty, the one thing that she really admired about them was they knew exactly who they were. They could act and they could be and they could play the part. And they could come right back to who they were and continue to explore their own presence, if you know what I mean, their own self. That was never taken away. She never had an opportunity of being able to do that. Her hair had to be perfect, her skin had to be perfect, her makeup had to be perfect, her manners had to be perfect, she had to be perfect. So she couldn't be like the two people that she looked up to and would have admired. So it was a very strange one, because I thought she was going to show me exactly the death scene. I thought that's what she was there for. And that was the one thing that she wasn't there for. You know, I will say, on the deck, there was kicking went on, and she was very badly bruised. On his arm there were scrap marks. There was bruising round the shoulders. There was bruising because she did try and defend herself. And yet she didn't consider that to be as bad as she considered what the captain had done. So the water thing, okay, all I'm going to say is, take yourself from the deck of a boat into black water without the ability to swim, and imagine that that is going down your throat and up your nostrils, and you are being filled with water, and that is the most terrifying thing in the world for you, and has been your entire life. Now you're living it. That's what this girl had. She then said that when it came to the autopsy, that it was botched, that the right people were put in place for the autopsy, to write the right things, to say the right things, for an accidental death. And then, when it didn't sound right after the book was released by the captain, they tried to look at the death again. But years had passed. I don't know, I presume possibly 20, 30 years had passed from her death. The DNA was gone. Pages were missing. People had died. Things had changed. The evidence was not there. But at the time of her death, all the evidence was there. So it's not a happy end for a person who put so much in to other people's happiness and overlooked so much. And she did overlook so much. To think that that's how your death actually takes place. And the word that went through time and time and time again when she spoke was, they betrayed me. Even down to the people who did the autopsy, they betrayed her. And apparently her friend, her very good friend, Frank Sinatra, did not step in at any stage to be helpful. In fact, he did the opposite. He got the right people to do the autopsy and to write it. And that was another betrayal. So, while the rest of us breathe normal air, and we're not on yachts, let's be thankful that perhaps we are living the life that we're living and not that of the so-called stars in Hollywood, because as she said, men dress very well there in suits with position and with money, and you would not believe what actually takes place. So, may not be happy. I will say she was a very interesting woman, and I would have loved her to have found out who she was. That would have been so enriching. But I know who she is on the other side, and she wanted this out there this weekend. For some reason, this weekend, she was very adamant. I tried to do it last night. I couldn't do it. This was not an easy one to do because there was so many people. There were so many characters involved in her life. But I am just going to say, I can do no more than just hand this into your hands and let you make up your own mind. And also, whilst it not be happy, I hope that in this time of COVID and stuff like that there, and the world being maybe upside down in many ways, I really hope that you are taking good care of yourselves and you are taking good care of each other. So, this is Sharon the Reader, and I just want to say, take care, God bless, speak soon.